One more minute, folks. Thanks for your patience. Paula, thank you for letting me know you can hear. Great, and here's Zach. Zach, can I test your audio before we start the meeting?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you so much for
Perfect.
being here.
Happy to be here.
All right, I'll go ahead and get your May 2024 HOPE meeting started. Thank you all for being here. We'll go ahead and do some business in the beginning and then get into the fun content for today. Okay. And Rebecca, can I ask if you see anybody who is waiting in the lobby, if you can please let them in? That would be helpful. Oh, apologies. Virtual housekeeping, please mute yourself. You're welcome to go on or off camera if you need to, but please stay muted if you're not sharing. Type any questions into the chat. There'll be public comment right after we go over the agenda. If you do want to make a public comment, type your name into the chat and let folks know that you want to make a comment. And I'll also pause for anybody who's called in on the phone. A reminder of the agreements for the culture and the conduct of the HOPE Board of kindness and inclusivity and respect. And another reminder about the 4 entities that make up our Coordinated Homeless Response Office and System: Benton County, the City of Corvallis, Community Services Consortium, and the City of Philomath, with representation from all of those entities on this board. Okay, what do we have in store today? We'll do roll call and meeting minutes approval, and then we've got a fantastic educational component on legislation from one of our guests here tonight, Zach Reeves. And then I can hear someone's feedback on a mic. If you wouldn't mind, please muting yourself. Then we'll move on to a community progress update on one of the HOPE Advisory Board's recommendations, the situation table. So thanks to Captain Goodwin and Dan Easdale from Corvallis Housing First for being here to share that. And then our Coordinated Homeless Response Office folks, myself and Rebecca, we're going to share an update on the progress in implementing the flexible housing subsidy pool. And then we've got a couple other general updates, and we have time to share updates from any HOPE Board members as well. Okay, public comment. I will go ahead and stop sharing and check the chat here. Are there any folks who would like to make a public comment? Okay, I'm seeing none, and I don't see anybody who has called in on the phone. So we will go ahead and say there's no public comment today. Okay, moving on. The March meeting minutes I sent out last week. Are there any additions or edits to those meeting minutes from the board members? I received none via email. I'm hearing none. So can I have a motion to approve your minutes, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Carol. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Is that Brian?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good to hear your voice. Haven't seen you in a while. I'll go through and list your name. If you did not attend the March meeting, please abstain, but say you're here and you vote yes or no on the meeting minutes. Councillor Andrade.
Yes.
Thank you. Carol.
Yes and yes.
Thank you. Bruce and Alice are both excused this evening. Brian.
Yes.
Cade. Sarah.
Here and yes.
Anita.
Yep and yep.
Matt.
Yeah, it looks all good to me.
Joel.
Here and abstain.
Thank you. Ari.
Here and yes.
Barbara. Bria.
Here and I believe abstain.
Thank you. Rachel. Oh, I don't know that Rachel can attend this evening. I will confirm that, and Paula, I'll follow up with you. Peggy is excused tonight, and Andrea as well. Ilea,
Here and abstain.
thanks. Mark,
Here, abstain.
Chris, Commissioner Wise. Commissioner Wise has to be about 10 minutes late, but I know that she is attending. Paula, if you can mark her here, but have her not be part of the minutes vote. Thank you so much. Your meeting minutes are approved. There's another Hope Board membership change. Ricardo Contreras is not able to be on the Hope Board anymore, and there are openings for co-chairs. So please reach out to me if you are interested in being a co-chair. It would involve facilitating these meetings and helping to run them. Or put together any slide content. And then again, listing our new additions for this year for the folks who weren't able to attend the March Hope meeting. We have new representatives to the Hope Executive Committee and the Hope Board. All right, I'm going to stop screen sharing. And Zach, I'd love to have you introduce yourself to the board and talk about why you're here tonight, and take it away.
Hey, thank you, Julia. Appreciate it. I am happy to be here. My name is Zach Reeves. I work for CFM Advocates. We're a contract lobby firm. We've got offices in both Salem, and then we have a DC branch as well. And we represent Benton County at both the state and the federal level. I, along with my colleague, Ryan Gleason, we represent Benton County at the state level. So given the wealth of knowledge and experience in the room, I'm probably the least qualified to be talking about this sort of stuff, but I'm happy to give you all an overview of what I know about, the bills that passed in the most recent legislative session that we concluded at the end of March. And I just want to say, on a personal level, as a lifelong resident of Corvallis, I appreciate all the hard work that many folks in this virtual room have put into addressing some of the issues in our community. So, Julie, I'm going to try my best to screen share here. I have had horrible luck with Teams in the past, but I'm going to give it the old college try here, and I hope that, okay.
You're doing great so far.
All right. So are you all able to see the presentation now?
It's perfect.
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I think I just covered this slide. That's just the introduction, and I did that without it. So I'll get into the meat of things. We're just going to kind of go over a little bit of the recap of the legislative session, some of the timelines on that, some of the major issues that we dealt with in Salem. We'll give a brief overview of some housing and homelessness related bills, and then really the meat of the issue and what we really, the legislature really accomplished this session is going to be contained in 1537 and 1530. And those are the governor's priority bills for the session. So after that, we will take a look at two Benton County specific funding issues that we were able to secure with the help of Benton County and City of Corvallis folks. So let's see if I can move this along there. So just a quick recap of the 2024 legislative session. Most of you are most likely aware, but Oregon voters, I believe in 2010, voted in annual sessions for the legislature to come in for an annual session. And so every even numbered years, the legislature convenes at the beginning of February for a 35-day legislative session. Theoretically, it is just to balance the biennial budget and get out of there. As we all know, if we give legislators the opportunity to pass bills, they're going to pass bills. So what we have now is a chaotic 35-day sprint to the finish, in which they tackle some fairly large issues in a very, very, very small amount of time. So each legislator gets 2 bills, each committee gets 3 bills, and then the presiding officer is the Speaker of the House, and the Senate President are allocated unlimited bills. The universe is about 250 bills large. So it's much smaller than we see in a regular longer session in the odd numbered years. But what the result is that they try to pack a lot of concepts into one bill, and it makes it challenging to track. So we started on February 5th. I believe March 10th, I didn't have this in here, but March 10th, I believe, was the constitutional sine die. So that's the date, the drop dead date that they had to finish up. They finished on March 7th. That economic forecast there is the legislature receives an economic forecast from state economists on a quarterly basis, and that informs their decision making from a budgetary standpoint. That February 7th economic forecast was the last one that they received prior to having to craft their mid-biennium budget and get a glide path out of there. So obviously the major issues that were present in session this year, the one we're going to talk about and is an ongoing issue, housing and homelessness. The other very, very, very large issue that the legislature tackled this session and ultimately produced some fairly significant changes that we could spend another hour talking about that as well, is changes to the Measure 110 system and some reforms there and some additional funding added, plugged in certain places. Campaign finance reform, not an issue of this of interest to this group, but something that in particular our soon to be former Representative Dan Rayfield was very passionate about. So if I can move it along. Let's see, there we go. So just briefly, some of the lower profile bills that are housing related that passed this session. So Senate Bill 1564 was a bipartisan bill that will require the Department of Land Conservation and Development to adopt, to create and adopt model housing ordinances that local governments that may not have the capacity to update theirs on a regular basis can use. So DLCD will create 3 different ones segmented in by population. I believe it's 0 to 2,500, 2,500 to 25,000, and then 25,000 and above. Local governments, if they so choose, can pick and choose from whichever pieces of these model ordinances they like. So, if you have a smaller jurisdiction that just doesn't have the capacity to update their ordinances on a regular basis, they can use these model ordinances. From a developer perspective, I think it provides you some continuity across the state. House Bill 4063 was the House Housing Committee omnibus bill. It's mainly technical changes that by and large are not particularly applicable to at the local level. House Bill 4134 was an allocation of $7.1 million to 4 cities. So we have Burns, McMinnville, Amity, and Toledo for certain very specific shovel-ready projects that had pretty strict affordability requirements, mainly water and sewer infrastructure related things. But those 4 cities had projects that were very far along in the process and just needed this final little push to get them over the hump. That bill included, the original bill included $21.3 million for 11 cities, but as we got that economic forecast and the kind of entire financial picture came into view, they pared that down to just those 4. And then finally, Senate Bill 1529 is mainly technical updates to some of these the emergency weather resources. I think one thing that is of note to folks on this call, and mainly particularly to cities, it allows them to work with OHA to distribute air conditioners and air filters in advance of an emergency. And previously they had been limited to doing it during or after. So, if we have heat emergencies that we're seeing more and more, distributing an air conditioner to a family in need is not particularly helpful 5 days after the fact. So this will allow them now to contract with OHA to distribute them prior to any emergency, with the hope of providing some relief. And there we go. So getting to kind of the two big bills that we saw pass in the most recent session. Senate Bill 1537 was the governor's housing production bill. So Governor Kotek came into the legislative session with one priority. It was this bill. It follows up by and large on a House bill, I believe 4134 was the number, that failed on the last day of session in the 2023 long session. That had some components that both the environmental community and the land use advocates and also cities and counties were adamantly opposed to. The governor's office worked, to their credit, worked tirelessly over the interim to craft a bill that everybody could, if not support, live with. At the end of the day, there are components in there that are going to be problematic from a local government perspective, particularly cities, to administer. But on the whole, there are some components in there that will hopefully incentivize housing production in spite of some of the challenges that there's going to be for cities. So, and one of the bigger components of it that was kind of one of the centerpieces was pared down pretty significantly in a big concession to land use advocates. So, Senate Bill 1537 created a new state agency, essentially, this Housing Accountability and Production Office. So that is a joint effort where it's an effort within DLCD to essentially mediate disputes and mediate disputes between local governments and developers, and also provide smaller local governments with technical assistance. And so to that end, H.O.P.E was funded with $5 million for technical assistance grants for smaller local governments. And its objective is to support increased housing production, both by supporting local jurisdictions and also developers. And so another component of Senate Bill 1537 was related to attorney fee provisions. It expands the prevailing party attorney fees provisions for affordable housing to include local governments, so that when local governments are involved in these lawsuits and they're on the prevailing side, they're able to recoup some of those fees that they're on the hook for. So some of this is more in the weeds than maybe we need to get into, but $3 million to help small and rural local governments access federal infrastructure programs. So again, these is another one of these programs that's aimed at small jurisdictions that don't have the staff time, the capacity to access some of these resources that some of the larger jurisdictions are able to. And another key component of that is in a requirement for DLCD to develop some considerations and metrics to provide to the legislature to consider when they are prioritizing future infrastructure investments. So as we'll get to in Senate Bill 1530, the legislature used a rather opaque process to prioritize which local projects were funded. This is designed to kind of provide an objective framework so the legislature can rank infrastructure investments moving into the future. And then there is as part of the bill, there was $75 million that will create a revolving loan fund in the Oregon Housing and Community Services Office that local governments can use as a means of subsidizing moderate and affordable housing investments. And so, if there is a developer in town that is just almost able to make their project pencil out, the city of Corvallis or Benton County could access that revolving loan fund. They provide a subsidy for the developer. The developer then pays a fee in lieu of those property taxes back to the state to make that fund whole. And so theoretically that 75 million stays there and is able to incentivize projects over and over. And then, as I mentioned with the land use thing just a few minutes ago, Senate Bill 1537 contains a provision that allows local jurisdictions a one-time UGB expansion. This was a heavily negotiated with land use advocates and very nearly derailed the bill. So the end result is a policy that has very onerous affordability requirements and other conditions that will really limit the usefulness of this. Any city under 25,000 is able to annex or to bring in 50 acres, up to 50 acres on a one-time basis. Anything over 25,000, you're able to bring in 100 acres. But the way that it is written, those cities that are very much in need of additional buildable land are highly unlikely to take advantage of this. So while it was a heavily contested piece of policy, it's unlikely to be used as far as I understand anywhere in the state. And then the final thing I'll mention on Senate Bill 1537 is, and what I mentioned earlier about some of the cities having heartburn with this bill, is the mandatory adjustments that are required. So this will require cities to allow certain adjustments to local code up to a maximum of 10 adjustments per project. The developer must show that the adjustments are there to improve feasibility and or the affordability of the project, or also to reduce the sale cost or increase the number of units that can be built. Cities objected pretty heavily to this, arguing that their process was already in place to account for many of these things, and the worry that they are going to be forced to accept some of these adjustments was a challenging place for them to be. They'll be able to appeal to this newly created H.O.P.E as necessary, and so the next thing is going to be to see how this plays out in real time. So a lot of the policy is unlikely from a practical standpoint to increase housing production or increase the number of housing units. But then we have Senate Bill 1530, which is the financial side of Senate Bill 1537. And this is going to be, where some of the rubber meets the road, and some of these dollars are going to be allocated. I'm sorry, my dog's barking here. Going to be allocated to both local governments and then to mostly existing programs statewide that may have some serious impact. So as part of Senate Bill 1530, the legislature allocated an additional $5 million to fund individual development accounts, which are a tool for low-income families to begin to create some savings with the goal of home ownership. So additionally, there's $41 million for emergency rent assistance programs. $7 million of that is going to the Urban League of Portland, but the remaining 34 will be distributed statewide to emergency rent assistance programs. $65 million of the money will be allocated to continued operation of existing shelters. So in the past 4 years, with all the influx of one-time funding, both at the federal level and the state level, we've had a lot of shelters, which is a good thing. Shelters stood up statewide. The issue now is going to be ongoing funding for those projects. So there were several projects statewide that had been stood up at the height of the pandemic with some of those one-time dollars that were at risk of closing because there were no ongoing operational funding accessible. So this $65 million should keep the lights on at the vast majority of shelters statewide, at least through the next 2 years. The issue is, of course, now in 2 years, we'll be back in the same place, fighting for funding to keep these shelters operational. So, a temporary fix to a long-term problem, but we kicked the can down the road for approximately 2 more years. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the legislature allocated $95 million to 44 projects statewide, and these are direct grants to local governments. for mainly water and sewer infrastructure projects with a nexus to housing. And I had mentioned that there was a nebulous process that they used to arrive at this. They essentially took a League of Oregon Cities survey that contained hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of projects, and they prioritized them in a way that is known only to them, and they spit out the list of 44 projects. The city of Albany, so tangentially, a part of Albany is in Benton County, received $2.1 million for extension of water and sewer infrastructure over there. Other than that, there was none of this money was allocated to Benton County. And then the $36 million to OHA there was $18 million for recovery housing projects. So those experienced substance abuse, there is money there for additional treatment facilities. $7.5 million for the Healthy Homes Repair Fund, and then $3.5 million for the Air Conditioning and Air Filter Deployment Fund. So some of these increased livability programs are going to be substantially boosted. On that note, there was an additional $4 million for the Residential Heat Pump Fund. So that is, those are distributed to lower income families to live more comfortably in a world where we're all subject to climate change. So as a sum, they allocated about $280 million, which is in a short session where they are theoretically just balancing the budget and don't have a ton of financial flexibility. It is a massive investment in the middle of a biennium. It is a drop in the bucket in terms of what is needed, but it's a start, and the hope is that we continue into the 2025 session having established some of these priorities, and there's some momentum there to continue the efforts that they made during the 2024 session. And then getting down onto the granular level for Benton County, the county's elected officials and staff work closely with Speaker Rayfield's office to secure 2 allocations that are going to contribute pretty significantly to addressing some of the issues in the community. As voted on by the commissioners, the number one priority was a $5 million request from the state to relocate services provided by the Behavioral Health Department and the CHCs of Benton and Lynn County. This money will allow the providers to move into, I believe, the Sunset Building, if I'm not mistaken, and to more effectively serve children and families in the area, as well as allow them to increase their caseloads and to serve more children and families that are in need of services.
Zach,
and
I want
then,
to jump in because
yes.
I don't think it's the Sunset Building, but it is on Research Way.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I knew it was somewhere out there, but I wasn't quite sure where.
Yes, over the rainbow, just down Research Way, but not in Sunset.
Okay, thank you. And then additionally, so late in session, the county was contacted by Speaker Rayfield's office asking for an additional housing related ask that he could submit for legislative approval. The city and county staff, or the county staff working closely with the city folks, were able to come up with a proposal to add 11 units of housing to the county flexible housing subsidy pool. The ask was for $4.9 million to match with, I believe, about another $4 million of existing funding to purchase and renovate a building in Corvallis that can be used. Both there's some commercial space and also 11 units of affordable housing. The county was ultimately allocated $2.5 million, and I believe, and this is where I'm kind of getting out over my skis a little bit here, because the last information I had was that the goal was to have these units available for occupancy by the end of 2024, but I have not gotten updated information on that since the end of session, and I don't know if anybody in this group has. So the money was earmarked for this county, and so the hope is that we can add some additional affordable housing there. And then let's see, there we go. So and just real quick here, looking ahead into the future, I mentioned this briefly. What we heard from the state economist in that February 7th presentation was that while, you know, numbers are up right now, we're looking at a rather flat revenue forecast for the next 2 years. So what that means is that while costs are going up and the cost of providing some of these services are going up, the revenue is going to flatten. So essentially it becomes a cuts budget. And so one of the worries that we have is that there is not going to be as much essentially discretionary money to spend, and that there's going to have to be some hard choices that are made at the legislative level. So that remains to be seen. We've been hearing since the beginning of COVID that revenue was going to go through the floor, and we have not seen that yet. We've seen quite the opposite, and so the hope remains that things that outlook will continue to get rosier, but that is something we just can't tell. And then, you know, I mentioned earlier creating some momentum for continuing to fund some of these issues that are in dire need of funding. The challenge that local governments face is creating the expectation of ongoing funding. And so how do we establish the need and not have to be back on our hands and knees, essentially begging the legislature to allow us to limp along? And as an example, the shelter funding, 2 years of shelter funding, and then we're back in the same place starting over. It's an ongoing challenge, and one that you know, we're hopeful we can make some progress on. And I think from a local level, we have benefited greatly from the leadership and abilities of the former speaker, Dan Rayfield, and his ability to deliver mainly financial resources and other things to this area. And as we move into a new era with new legislators, it remains to be seen what the financial landscape looks like, and so as you know, as we move forward with new representatives, it will be interesting to see how successful we're able to be in with some of these financial asks in particular. And then the final thing I'll say here is that, you know, as we move kind of towards summer and then into the fall, I myself and Ryan will be working with Benton County. I'm sure the city is developing its priorities. And just as somebody who represents local governments all over the state, I would just put a pitch in for the city and the county working hand in hand on advancing the ball on some of these priorities and working in tandem rather than in parallel, and trying to advance some of these things as we move forward. So that's essentially it for me. Julie, I have no idea how long I just went, but I hope that was sufficient for everybody, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
No, you're okay. I would have cut you off in 1 minute at 4:35.
Perfect.
So make sure we have
Perfect.
time for questions. If you can stop screen sharing so that I can see
Oh, yeah.
everybody's faces.
All right, see, now we gotta
And it
figure
looks
out
like there's one thing to add from Rebecca. Rebecca, go for it.
and show. There we go.
Yeah, thank you, Julie, and thank you very much, Zach. That was really helpful. We did just want to add a little bit of clarity around the 2.5 million. We are actually going to be actively looking for sites that are appropriate for our flexible housing subsidy pool program. We do not have a site currently identified, but we certainly are looking at throughout the entire Benton County and not exclusively to the city of Corvallis. Certainly, if there's opportunities there, we will pursue those, but we definitely want to find sites that are ready to essentially move in ready and definitely serve the variety of needs of our flexible housing subsidy pool. And thank you very much for your work in helping us get that.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, and thank you, Zach. There was stuff in there I hadn't heard before yet, so I really appreciate that legislative overview. Questions from our Hope Board members about anything that Zach shared? Carol, is that pen? Yep, go for it.
There we go. Two questions. Excuse me. One of them, and when you were talking about Senate Bill 1537, are all those proposals aimed at affordable housing? The various, like there's something about the revolving fund and to help developers to push them over that edge. Is that all? Is that for affordable housing or any housing?
It's for affordable. The revolving loan fund is for subsidies for affordable and moderate income housing. I believe, and don't quote me on this, I don't have the bill in front of me. I believe it's 120% of AMI and lower. But they, depending on the bill, they define affordable,
Sure.
affordable and moderate income differently. And I'm just not. I believe it's 120% and lower.
Yeah, I know. This describing affordable is all over the board, but that's the intent, is to go for housing for people who currently can't have housing.
Yeah, it's not for market rate.
Right. And then the Housing Accountability and Protection Office, which is a terrible long name, is it the concern is it's just going to end up being another bureaucracy or barrier that's going to siphon off money that could have gone directly to housing or to shelters or to someplace. Was there any conversation around that when it was discussed being created?
Carol, I'm having a little PTSD right now because those were exactly the arguments that we made to legislators as they were formulating this. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Our argument was that you can, and the $5 million that I referenced, that's just the portion that's allocated to assist local governments. They allocated more money, to stand up a whole office, to have other functions. As somebody who represents local governments at the state level, there's a lot of challenges with saying, trust us, we are the good stewards of this money, and we are the boots on the ground folks who are going to carry out a lot of the stuff that you are dictating happens. And so the more we can eliminate some of those administrative costs that come along with the creation of a new state agency, the more, you're going to get a better bang for your buck. So yes, you're absolutely correct. That was one of the things that we when I say we, I mean counties and cities, pushed back pretty strongly on, was the need for, or the lack of a need for, a new office to do things that we saw as already happening. And so that, that just that money could be better utilized elsewhere.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Carol, and the insights, Zach. Other questions from our HOPE Advisory Board members? And I see that Sarah just was able to rejoin. Sarah, I want to make sure you get an opportunity if you have any questions about any of the legislation before we move on.
I don't. Thank you, though, Julie.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Zach, and for putting all this effort into this overview. It will be included in the slides that get posted within 7 business days. And if you do have questions that you forgot about right now and you remember them later, please email me and I'll get responses back from Zach as best we can.
Thanks, everyone. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Zach. Really appreciate your insights. Okay, we will move next to the situation table, and thank you, Captain Goodwin and Dan, for being here to talk about how it's been going. I'll pass the mic over to you.
Certainly, and we have a slideshow to help walk through the process, and some folks that are here tonight are familiar with it, others are not, so we're gonna make sure that everybody gets a little bit of that background as well. Hopefully I can share my screen. Did that work?
Yes, you're good, Joel.
Okay, here we go. Maybe. So the first question we want to answer is sort of where did the situation table come from as a concept? It originated in Saskatchewan in 2011. It was apparently adopted from a Scottish program. I don't admittedly know anything about that, but it's adapted and evolved over the years. And since 2011, it has become fairly widespread in Canada. In Saskatchewan, they have 14 different situation tables for different cities or regions. In the province of Ontario, they have 70 tables. I know in larger cities, they break it down so that the city of Toronto, for example, is a very large city. They don't just have one situation table, they have multiple for different neighborhoods or areas. It came to the United States, as best I know, in 2015, when the Chelsea, Massachusetts Police Department adopted it. They call it the H.O.P.E model. At that time, they were the 11th most dangerous city in the United States and the most dangerous city in Massachusetts, even though size-wise, they're pretty similar to Corvallis. Those are not distinctions that they were interested in keeping. And as a result, at least in large part to the H.O.P.E model and situation table, by 2019, they were not on either of those lists anymore. And that is kind of one of the strengths of the situation table, is it can be adapted to each community's need. In Chelsea, it was more about gang violence and crime. Obviously, in our community, we have different needs that we want to address. So how did it end up here in Corvallis and Benton County? The H.O.P.E Advisory Board, formed in 2019, worked on recommendations for City Council and County Commissioners. The spring of 2021 came up with a list of those. One of those was some type of a coordinated response, with the situation table sort of being the primary contender for that. Along the way, we've had three major milestones. The first one was needed to build support amongst our service providers because they are key to making the situation table work. So we had several meetings and conversations, and that was not a difficult milestone to accomplish. The second piece was figuring out who's going to host it. We recognized that we didn't want people to think that this was just simply a police initiative of some kind. We were very sensitive to that. And we saw that we were having success with our core team, our crisis outreach response and engagement team, which pairs an officer with a qualified mental health practitioner from Benton County Behavioral Health. And they seemed like a very reasonable place to host or facilitate the situation table, because they would likely be bringing situations to the table and or responding out depending on the needs for that situation. And then the third milestone was securing funding. The situation table itself does not require any dedicated funding, but we need to be trained. And in order to fly our instructors out and make sure that we were getting the appropriate materials and buy-in from the originating agencies, there was a cost associated with that, a one-time cost. And we were very grateful that IHN CCO was able and willing to step up and provide that funding for the training. The training was held on October 19th and 20th, 23, with the first situation table held on October 29th. So we did not waste a lot of time after the training before we got right to it. Since then, we've passed the 6-month mark, which is why we're talking about this today. But just sort of an overview of how it works. It's a 4-filter process, and this is, again, not something that we created. It's something that's been proven since 2011 in Canada and spreading very widely since then. The first filter of that 4-filter process does not occur at the situation table. It's out in the field, as it were. It could be a police officer, EMT, someone at the daytime drop-in center, someone at Unity Shelter that sees somebody who is at acutely elevated risk and sort of does that assessment, that screening out in the field. That's the initial first filter. They provide that information to somebody from their organization that attends the situation table, which is where the second filter occurs. And that's sharing de-identified information about the individual or the family that's at risk. So this is gender, it's an age range. We don't want to get too specific because people might put 2 and 2 together if we're too specific. So it could be it's a male between the ages of 30 and 39. They have these risk factors, and then they share just a brief synopsis of the circumstances the person or family is in to share with the group. And then we walk through a process. There are specific questions that we ask, does it cross multiple service sectors? Do we agree that there's a risk that the risk will continue if there's not some sort of intervention, things like that, to make sure that everybody in the room concurs that this meets that criteria. And that process really helps us get past HIPAA. There are a lot of participants that are bound by HIPAA and they can't share information, but HIPAA also says that if someone is at acutely elevated risk, not only can you, but you shall. You are basically required to share that information to reduce their risk. So going through that process helps us to cross that threshold and make sure that everybody's in a good spot with that. If we meet that criteria, if everybody agrees that we meet that acutely elevated risk consensus, we move to filter 3. With that, we share the name of the person or the family that is being discussed. We share their age or date of birth. And that gives participants a chance to check and see if they have, they already have been working with them or already have awareness of them. And then some discussion about, yes, we started an intake with them, but they never completed it. Or we were working with them 2 months ago, haven't seen them since, whatever it might be, to start forming a team. And agents will self-identify based on those risk factors and the conversations being had. Yes, I can be part of a response to intervene with them and try to get them connected with services. And that's the filter 4. So at the conclusion of the meeting, the people that have self-identified will remain after the meeting, formulate a game plan to hopefully connect with that person or family within 24 to 48 hours in the field, meet them where they are, tailor a solution for them rather than, giving them a brochure or asking them to come into an appointment. They're meeting them where they're at to hopefully reduce that risk. So who has been involved in this? And Dan with Corvallis Housing First has been our recorder. So I'm going to let him share his perspectives on who's been involved and how maybe the situation table is different than some other efforts that have been in the works or are currently in the works in terms of that engagement and that collaboration. Dan, if you wouldn't mind.
Not at all. As you can see, just by the agency logos going up there, it's quite a group. It's a very diverse group. And this is a group that meets every Monday. And we've met every Monday since we started, except I think for 2 holidays. It's a big ask for everyone to send people every week to attend to this, but people have been showing up from these agencies and there's more. So I think that's one of the strengths of this situation table is the number of partners that are coming every week, then adding their expertise. It is very unusual for us to have a situation discuss an individual or a family that several groups in the room don't know about. So for the most part, we're talking about folks that are known. But what is not often known is who else is working with them. So if we can meet that elevated risk, that acutely elevated risk threshold, then we're privy to all that information and we can come together as a group. I would also just add, as a service provider, I know about all of these agencies and I have not really worked with many of them that are in the room. So this has been a great opportunity to get to know folks that also work with the same individuals and to have that person to call. So, we have situations we bring to the table, but we may have other questions. And now I know, oh, so-and-so's from this organization at the situation table. I'm going to give them a call. So that has been extremely helpful. It's a great mix of folks across the spectrum. You've got emergency services, you've got county, you've got nonprofits, you've got Samaritan, you've got shelter providers, you've got a wonderful combination of folks. So we're 6 months in and we're still showing up.
Yeah,
that's the good news.
And actually, I'd take it a step further. We're still adding groups. We continue to have, in fact, within the last 2 weeks, we've added someone else that had not been attending heard about it from somebody who is attending and said, we want to check it out. And after checking it out has said, yeah, we want to be involved in this. We may be bringing situations, we may be helping with situations, but they want to be involved. So, and for a little additional perspective, when we had the training back in October, our instructor said that typically when they do a training, they have maybe 20, 25 participants. We had about 45. So clearly there's a strong investment in our community to collaborating with those resources to do the best job we can to help people who are at risk.
And if I could add some additional information, I don't know if this is the spot to do it, but I think a number of us have been involved in other collaborative efforts over the years. What I think has made this different is that we are just addressing acutely elevated risk. We are not trying to solve for homelessness here or cure mental health. We have a situation that requires some immediate attention, and we are grouping all of those folks together into one team to address it. And that has been, at least for me, a relief, because I cannot put people in housing. We just don't have it. But we can go out and meet with someone. And that has felt more productive and a little more positive from my perspective.
Thanks, Dan. So some statistics. We have some good data to share. We wanted to wait till the 6-month mark to make sure we had some, a good sample set. In the first 6 months, we have reviewed 33 situations total, as you can see. We have supported 48 people total, because some of those aren't just individuals. It might be a couple or a family. In fact, you can see there on the graph that 21% of the situations in the first 6 months were families. 59% were female. There's one on that chart there that says not applicable. So disregard that piece, but female people have been obviously the majority of situations we've reviewed. In terms of agencies that are bringing situations, so far, as you can see, the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center has brought the majority of situations forward, followed by Faith, Hope, and Charity, the core team, community outreach, and so on. This is really kind of not surprising, because the drop-in center are the folks that are interacting on a daily basis with people who are experiencing risk and are in a position to be able to identify people who are at that acutely elevated risk. They're also commonly part of the response team out, because they already have that relationship and connection. So they often take the lead on that filter 4 team that goes out and engages the person where they're at. And it's important to note, and Dan alluded to this a little bit, this isn't necessarily about the case management. In fact, the data that we keep does not keep any names, addresses, dates of birth, any personal identifying information. This is about connecting people with services and reducing the risk. It's effectively about getting people to the starting line, not the finish line. If they can get engaged with those services, then each individual service provider does the case management on their own, as they normally would. It's about getting that connection there and getting them started in that process to reduce their risk. A graph of assisting agencies. As you can see, there are a whole bunch. Assistance can come in a variety of ways. It can be, the drop-in center taking the lead and making sure that other agencies are being coordinated to respond out. It can be the core team providing assistance with if there's a mental health risk factor. It can be Unity Shelter saying, hey, make sure you know that we're available and we have a bed that the person can stay at if they're willing and able. So it can come in a variety of ways. But I would say typically a team is, 3 to 5 agencies on average for that filter 14 that responds out.
And I would say here on that one too, Samaritan is still left off. They are the #1 assisting agency.
Yes.
So whoever your data recorder is needs to figure out.
Well, you'll have to have a word with them, Dan. So yes, that is definitely worth mentioning. Samaritan has been a invaluable asset in the process, and for whatever reason is not on our chart here. So if you're not already wearing glasses, this might be the one to break them out. As I'm doing here, this is the list of risk factors. All told, there are 104 different risk factors. These are standardized from our instructors, who in turn have received it from the folks that run the programs in Canada. That way we can compare our information with other situation tables nationwide or in Canada, so potentially internationally. So they're fairly standardized. It is a little difficult to draw super strong conclusions from this. But as you can see, housing is the leading risk factor, 32 of the 33 situations. The next one is basic needs, followed by poverty. And this is where it requires a little discussion. I think most people would agree that if somebody doesn't have appropriate housing, that also means their basic needs aren't being met, and also means they are likely experiencing poverty. So we can't necessarily add those together. Whereas conversely, if we're looking at mental health, there isn't just simply one risk factor for mental health. There's one for, that they have attempted suicide, they've discussed suicide, they've attempted self-harm, they've been diagnosed, or they've self-reported, or they're suspected of mental health. So there's a lot of different risk factors. And it's important to track those independently so we can have that really granular look at what's going on. But there's also a risk in trying to clump things together too much, so we might miss out on something. So, but this is a good representation of the more significant risk factors. And clearly, housing is far and away the leading risk factor for the folks that we have reviewed at the situation table. And that's part of it too, is that there need to be multiple risk factors. If somebody came in and said, well, they just don't have a job, we'll see if we can get them some help with that, but that's not multiple service sectors. It's not multiple risk factors. It's not what the situation is for to reduce that acutely elevated risk. So of the situations that have been reviewed, here's some data on the reason that we have closed them. 2 of them, as you can see, were rejected. So that doesn't mean they're not getting help. What that means is that they did not meet the criteria to be deemed acutely elevated risk. What we have seen is that if somebody brings a situation forward and we can't come to that consensus that they meet all the criteria to be acutely elevated risk, there's still some game planning and some services connection efforts for that person. It's not like they're just sort of set aside and said, it's not our problem. It just doesn't meet that threshold to go through the entire process. And that's also important, that it's not a tangible, trackable piece of information, but as Dan was talking about, people who come to the table, they're discussing, they're interacting with folks maybe they haven't interacted with much before. So it's building a stronger network outside of the situation table. People know that they can call and get that assistance they need, even if it doesn't reach that threshold of acutely elevated risk. And in these 2 instances, although it didn't go through all the way through the process, like I said, it doesn't mean that they got the assistance that they needed. 20 of the 33 were designated that their overall risk was lowered because they were connected to services. 1 was lowered risk because they were connected to personal supports. 3 were deemed still at acutely elevated risk. They were informed of services, but not yet connected. 2 refused services, and we know that that's going to happen. 4 were designated still at acutely elevated risk, but we identified some systemic issues that were sort of hampering the ability to connect. And when we've started tracking those, there's not really a large enough number to draw a whole lot of conclusions, but we did identify that we want to track those so we can continue that discussion. And then 1 person we simply couldn't locate. And for those that went through the whole process, sort of a graphical representation, I think is significant that 68% were at reduced risk as a result of the situation table. And again, this is about reducing risk. It's not about getting someone all the assistance they may need, because that may take years. Reduced risk could be, that the person has made some appointments and talked with some professionals about assistance they need, and they've never done that before. So the risk is reduced. On the opposite end of that spectrum, we have somebody that, in my 25 years with the police department, has been homeless and had substance issues and a variety of risk factors for much of the time that I've been here. there was an intervention at an opportune time with the right people. And last we heard, she is housed on a stable path, been reunited with the children, and really doing exceptionally well through the hard work of everybody that participates. So a lot of success, a lot of work still to do. The work is still ongoing. But we are very excited about the progress that we're making, and really making hopefully a long-term difference for a lot of the folks that have the most need in our community. So Dan, did I hit all the major points? Is there anything I forgot?
I think so. Just a couple of other, I think, interesting data points. The average number of risk factors per situation is 9. So it is not just housing, it is housing and many other things. So people can be having a stressful situation with housing, but it may not be acutely elevated risk. It is a combination of factors. And then, as Captain Goodwood mentioned, we are looking a lot closer at those systemic issues, even with everybody that's in the room. And there's a ton of expertise in the room. There are still situations that we feel a little powerless to be able to address. And so those are the ones we want to key in on a little bit more and try to gain some more insight.
We are happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Go for it, Carol.
I don't know. I don't want to be the only one asking questions. Do you foresee a time when you will have, I don't know how to phrase this without sounding harsh, when you have dealt with everybody in the community and we no longer need a situation table? I mean, we have a finite population, 50 some and 20 some, 25 some are students. So of that 50,000, I don't know what percentage, pretty small percentage that are high risk that you identify. So do you see that at some point maybe you'll have touched everybody, or is that too optimistic?
I would love it if that happened. I think realistically that it's not likely to happen. What I would speculate is that at some point, hopefully, we have made enough progress and hopefully built enough other systems, outside of the situation table, that maybe instead of meeting weekly, we meet every other week. Because we certainly don't want people to show up and not have anything to do. But I think there's always going to be a need to some degree. Hopefully we can have enough of an impact that we reduce it and have to meet less frequently at the very least.
And then a follow-up. If you meet once a month, I believe that's what Dan said. It was once a week?
Once a week, every Monday. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that settles it then. So then you can immediately respond to somebody. That's pretty. That's really amazing.
Yeah, and we try to. I mean, we recognize that everybody that's there is there because they want to make a difference and they've already got work to do.
Sure.
But at the same time, if we're engaging with the people at the highest risk, hopefully that reduces the work long term, right? But we try to be very respectful of people's time. Generally, we try to keep it to an hour, but we try to stay on task. This last week, we had, if memory serves, we had one situation to review, and that's part of the follow-up, right? Is that the team goes out and they engage the person. Well, there's an expectation that the following week they come back and give a status update. Ideally, we would close the situation, regardless of which way it is, the next week or within 2 weeks, which I think we're pretty good at. So there's that follow-up component. They report back of the general, overview of what happened. Go through the process for a new situation. This week, I think we reviewed a situation, had one new situation, and we were done in 30 minutes, 40 minutes. So typically an hour or less. We've had some weeks where we have had no new situations, but we've had some weeks where we've had 3 new situations. So we end up going a little bit longer with the meeting, but it's productive. So we try to really stay focused on the task at hand. rather than sort of getting too off topic, which happens sometimes anyway.
Well, it's interesting because you brought this concept of the hub up maybe 3 years ago. Early on, I remember 4. And so things move slowly, but they move. So that's great.
Yeah.
And congratulations to you for staying with it, Joel, because I remember at the time there was a certain amount of, dare I say, skepticism. So good work.
Thank you.
And you became captain because of that, I think.
Sure.
No.
Thanks for the question, Carol. Anita, you want to chime in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I would just offer that the situation table is a fabulous communication tool, right? All of us agencies get together, we communicate with each other, we rally the troops. But I think we'd be remiss without pointing out that we do hit roadblocks all the time, because where we live, it's not just about the parties speaking to each other, it's about the resources available. Like the systemic issues Dan speaks of, there's no mental health to speak of. There's no substance abuse treatment to speak of. There's a lot of services that rural Oregon and Oregon in general doesn't have, and thus we can't help these folks. We do what we can to hook them up with resources, get them into healthcare and all those things, but we regularly hit a brick wall because the situation table doesn't create the resources. We're able to bring it to the attention of people who may be able to, but that is a very significant barrier to the folks that are brought to the situation table all the time. So I just want to make sure we mention that piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, very true.
Thank you, Anita. And that's why, Dan, that's actually the data I'm most interested in, in general over the long haul is, if 100% of the systemic issues were, secure residential treatment for the elderly, whatever it is, right? Having that kind of data when we're looking at how do we fund system gaps, I think is going to be so helpful. And I know we only have 6 months of that data, but ongoing to learn more of that. Thank you for keeping track of it.
And it is something that's evolved as we've moved along. So we weren't, I think we were aware that there were gaps, but just how to record it. So I think we're refining the process as we go.
Well, thank you for being flexible. Matt, you have a question.
Yeah. Do you think, I don't know if you guys have gotten the sense throughout this process, or if it's something you guys are thinking this board could, something that could evolve along the way, but do you get the sense that having these connections between different agencies that may not necessarily be talking to each other has been fostering connections between them beyond just potential clients or potential situations to deal with, and onto more long-term cooperation, I guess?
I think so. I see Anita nodding and I see Dan nodding, and they both are there. So I think that's I think that we've already seen that, not necessarily a major partnership or anything like that, but definitely better communication. We share amongst the providers that participate, we share a contact list. So even if it's not a situation table situation, if they just need, I need help with because this person is having medical issues. Oh, I know I can call Anita and she's the person that put me in touch with the right folks. So I think a lot of that is helping as sort of those intangibles that we talked about, that there's no chart or graph that captures it, but it's also pretty significant, I think.
Yeah, we also recognize that situations happen on other days besides Mondays, but now we know who to call. So Anita, I'm on the phone with all the time, so she probably has me blocked. But I can, if I have a situation, I know 3 or 4 people that I can call now and create a small team to try to address something.
Cool. Thank you for your answer, Chief Goodwin.
You bet.
Okay.
And Dan.
Captains Dan and Joel.
Yeah.
I have a bigger title than captain on this this particular one. It was a brilliant question, by the way.
All right, other HOPE board members who have questions about the situation table. And Damien, I saw you put something in the chat. Thank you very much for that. And I wanted to make sure you, Joel, and Dan both saw it. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. That was wonderful to see the progress from an original HOPE Advisory Board recommendation to implementation to success rates. Thank you for closing that circle, and hopefully we can hear an update in the coming years as it proceeds.
Sure.
Thanks, Joel. Thanks, Dan. Yes, round of applause. And Captain Goodwin, I know you need to exit at any time, so thank you for being here. I'll go ahead and move on to our next item. Okay. And Rebecca, do you want me to hand this off to you at this point or continue to do a few slides?
If you could do this slide.
Sure. This is just a reminder for folks tuning in and from the community that the HOPE Advisory Board, the role that you all play in our coordinated homeless response system is threefold right now, really as a forum for this engagement. What's going on? How do we collaborate and communicate? And then as a liaison between our member governments and our community partners with communication and informed decision making, and then input as we develop programs or implement programs that are already developed, and to provide updates on our ongoing implementation of our 5-year strategic plan. Your input is key, and it's one of the most incredible roles the HOPE Board plays. So just a reminder of your work plan this year. You met in March when we first introduced the flexible housing subsidy pool. We have some updates for you tonight about implementation of the flexible housing subsidy pool model, and want another opportunity for your questions on that. In August will be the final opportunity for community engagement on the Flex Pool. And then in October, we hope to bring an update about severe weather emergency response. And I mentioned at last meeting, we would be seeking input or participation from HOPE Board members as necessary. So I wanted to pause for a minute and really thank Ari and Cade and Barbara, because they dedicated over a week of their time to reviewing applications for funding, to meeting with the committee of review members. And I appreciate your involvement as HOPE Board members in this process to make sure that we had a lot of different lenses looking at these applications. And thank you very much. Okay, Rebecca, can I pass it over to you?
Yeah, thank you. And so the last meeting, we went over a thorough review of the model of the flexible housing subsidy pool that we are working on developing and implementing here in our community. And so we wanted to provide you all with an update on the progress that has been made since we last met. And this specifically includes the staffing updates that we have now hired the housing navigator, who will support the flexible housing subsidy pool and make connections between participants in the flexible housing subsidy pool, that being people who have experienced unsheltered homelessness or are at risk of experiencing unsheltered homelessness, and navigating them through a diverse service network that will be coordinated through the flexible housing subsidy pool. Along with, we are very close to completing the recruitment for the program coordinator, who will really be at the helm of coordinating and facilitating the various different housing resources that we have in our community, and essentially serve as a a single point of contact in our community for both individuals and for program providers themselves to access housing resources. This includes the resources that are directly funded by the Flexible Housing Subsidy Pool and making the connections with other programs throughout the community to make sure that we are leveraging the various different supports that a person might need to successfully be rehoused. That includes potentially rental subsidies along with case management, and then potentially very flexible dollars in order to move into units such as moving costs, first and last month's rent, and deposit fees. We also have an update on the notice of funding opportunity that we brought to your attention last meeting as well. This is utilizing the same funding that will be supporting the housing navigator and the program coordinator positions. And that includes working with, hopefully being able to work with a community-based providers to provide case management for people who are being rehoused through our flexible housing subsidy pool, along with street outreach to make connections with people in our community where they are at, to help refer them to the resources available through the flexible housing subsidy pool. Next slide. So yeah, just sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but basically what we brought to your attention last meeting was the various different components of what a successful rehousing program needs to have specifically administered through our flexible housing subsidy pool. And so we understood that there would need to be staff capacity in any organization that could provide that program coordination for program referrals, data collection, communication, and reporting outcomes, and also making sure that there's an updated inventory and portfolio of available resources by making connections to both nonprofit organizations, state agencies, our housing authority, private landlords, and affordable housing developers, along with a housing navigator to specifically assist the people navigating those resources to access them. And so that was the identified component that we accomplished through the staffing capacity that we're currently recruiting for. And then the other components included that street outreach component to make sure that we are engaging people who are currently experiencing unsheltered homelessness, meeting them where they are, providing stabilization resources for them as we engage them to be referred to the flexible housing subsidy pool, and then that case management that was identified as well. So we are making significant progress in all of these various components, which are essentially the building blocks to our flexible housing subsidy pool. So we're excited to provide you that update. And so just another review of generally what is hopes to be accomplished through the flexible housing subsidy pool is really that centralized coordination of funding and housing supports that are available, not necessarily in just one agency, but strong coordination. So very similar to the types of conversations and discussion and coordination that was described in the situation table. But the flexible housing subsidy pool is really working to bring the resources that are necessary as we wrap around people with immediate responses. And so in order to have that immediacy built into this program, we really need to have dedicated staffing to be able to identify those various resources so that an individual or a direct service provider is not having to take on the navigation of a very complex service network, and that we centralize it into one location to be able to administer it. And as mentioned, and I want to clarify that not necessarily bringing it into one location as though that one agency has authority over this, but helping make the connection. So working with the housing authority, working with our community service consortium, working with various different resources that are available, and having the necessary staffing capacity to coordinate a specific plan based on an individual's need. So as you can see here, this graphic calls out the various different components that go into a flexible housing subsidy pool, and that ultimately this is one component of a larger system of care, and just helps connect the dots. So I'll hand it back to you, Julie, if you want to facilitate a discussion about it. You're on mute.
Thank you very much. Wanting to take the time to pause for questions about this program, especially for anybody who couldn't make the March meeting, or for any of our board members who do service provision, sharing how you might envision interacting with the flexible housing subsidy pool. This would be a time for that. And I know we've had conversations with some of you one-on-one to hear your feedback about this, but wanting to do it with the Hope Board in a transparent way. Sarah Devine, I don't know if you're at a point where you can talk right now, but we've had great conversations with you about how you envision your program and your clients perhaps being served by the Flex Pool. And I don't know if you can take a moment to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, of course, I'd be happy to. I don't know that I have a whole bunch to share, but I can definitely say how excited we at the school district are thinking about the ways that these funds might benefit our families, and how frequently we run into situations where the barrier to permanent stable housing is like a chunk of money to move in, or this rental debt that's been following them around, in times when our small, kind of small amounts that we can give through our own funds aren't sufficient. So we are thrilled by the idea for our families to have access to this, and to have that piece of like greater coordination and resources available when they're needed, and especially that piece of having them available quickly, which is, that's something I think we have that strength, but then we just don't have the capability to give $5,000 to one family. So I don't know, Julie, if there were other specific things you wanted me to touch on, but yes, I am so excited, and our whole team is just, I get asked probably every other day, when is that money going to be available? Because every day we're encountering families where that could really help them. So yeah.
Thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. I don't want to say, oh, we've talked with Sarah and she's excited about hearing it from you instead of me, I think is helpful. And Anita, I don't know if you had any thoughts you wanted to share about how you might interact or how might it help your clients, and you don't have to, so I don't want to pick on you if you don't want to talk.
I don't think I have anything super smart or pointed to say about it, other than all efforts are always welcome and we are desperate for all resources. What everyone knows, but thank you for asking.
And there is a question from Councillor Andrade in the chat. Rebecca, if you want to address that, or would you like me to?
Yeah, I can, if I understand the full context. So in previous presentations that we brought before the board, we discussed the community engagement that went into the plan of how we would administer the funding that we're getting from the state. And so part of that plan is the development and implementation of the flexible housing subsidy pool. The funding that we are using to develop and implement this initial pilot of a flexible housing subsidy pool is subject to the criteria of that specific funding program requirement of the state. And part of our plan to the state needed to identify 3 subpopulations that were overrepresented in our unsheltered community members. And so first, the criteria is that somebody has experienced unsheltered homelessness within a certain time frame in their recent history. And so that is a policy that is still being clarified at the state with our rural continuum of care as they attempt to make a policy that works for 26 different counties. So, but initially that's the criteria of unsheltered homelessness, which there will be additional clarity about that. But through our community engagement process, we identified that we had a alarming overrepresentation of our Native American and Indigenous community, along with our Black and African American community. In addition to that, we had an overrepresentation, and these conclusions about our overrepresentation was based on both a qualitative discussion that we had through 2 very large community planning group discussions, along with data that was collected locally and through OHCS. And so in addition to that was families with children. And that was really something that was brought forward during that qualitative data collection through discussions with you all, along with our larger local planning group, is that we were seeing a large overrepresentation of families with children in certain encampments around the community, showing up for services at various local service providers locations. And then in addition to that was really an overrepresentation of people whose acuity of need didn't quite reach the threshold of existing programs, but really did need a high level of care, that really weren't quite, in a location where they could directly go and find their own apartment and be self-sufficient in that particular category. So it was really a wide variety of both the household makeup, along with the need of the household, and then we also had a very specific demographic as far as racial and ethnic representation. And so with that, we realized we really needed to build a program that could be flexible enough to address the various experiences and barriers that a person presenting to receive these services would bring with them. And so that's something we're attempting to accomplish through the flexible housing subsidy pool.
Jessica, did that answer your question about the demographic supported by this program?
I do see she's asking for a little bit more clarity about the AMI. Really, right now, with there being the requirement that somebody is experiencing unsheltered homelessness, I think will be assessments that we will have with individuals to check to see what resources they come individually with and how we can help them utilize those along with any other additional supports. But certainly there is no income requirement for people to be able to access these services. It's just a matter of, just like we would work with another service provider to see how our services can support a holistic approach, we would work with the individual to see what resources they bring with them as well.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks for the question, Jessica. Other questions from our HOPE board members? All right. Well, I hope that means we've done a good job explaining it. Yay! Wanted to make sure as this program rolls out that folks feel in the loop and that we're doing it transparently, and you have questions, opportunities to ask questions as capacity is built. Okay, thanks everybody. We'll go ahead. I think we only have a few more updates to share. Our website, thanks so much to Sam and Kaylee and all the other folks at the health department who have updated our website. Now available on the website is the 5-year strategic plan from our House Bill 4123. It was approved and submitted to the state, and the annual report that goes along with that strategic plan. Annually, we have to report to the legislature. So that is available now on our website. Also, thanks to Carol and Lynn from the League of Women Voters for making sure that it gets to you all so that you can share it. And I will share these links out to HOPE board members as well. And just a reminder, because some of our web links have been updated since the last time some of you have been on our website. These are all new web links, and wanting to remind folks of that. I will go ahead and stop sharing. Any questions about that, about what you can now access on the website? And Carol, thank you for making sure to ask us about it. Appreciate the nudge. All right, well now we have a little bit of time for roundtable community updates, and I just have one to share from our grant writer, Libby Lowski-Winter. She has helped support lots of different community partners, and she worked with the Corvallis Daytime Drop-In Center to help with their application to OHA, and the Daytime Drop-In Center got funding, so did Jackson Street Youth. So I wanted to highlight the great work and share good positive progress that both of them are getting funds from OHA. And I can't remember the specific details, but I have it right here. I want to make sure that I say what it was. A community-based organization health equity grant. Okay. Any other roundtable updates to share? Carol, I know you got to leave. Thank you for being here. Any other updates on the housing and homelessness front that we didn't share here tonight? Good progress that's going on, work being done, any of it? Barbara, I don't know if you're in a place for me to call on you, but I believe that your data project has concluded, and hopefully we'll be able to hear about it more in depth at an upcoming HOPE meeting. But just wanted to congratulate you on it finishing if you had any thing to share about that.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. The housing data harmonization project, pilot project, of combining data from the Community Services Consortium and Samaritan Health Services. It has taken a bit to get that going because of the institutional review boards, but we have established that OSU is the honest broker and can handle data from both of those organizations. That data has been harmonized, and we have quite a bit of data to share, and we're hoping that we can share that at the August advisory board. And then Mark Edwards, who is the director of the OSU Oregon Policy Analysis Lab, OPAL, will be presenting that data with his grad student.
That's exciting. I can't wait to hear it. I hope that works for the August meeting. The HOPE Executive Committee will have the options of when to put things on different agendas, and I'll be sure to communicate it to them.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the work you've done on that, Barbara. I think we first met about that 3 years ago. It's so exciting to see it happen. Takes time. All right, any other roundtable updates from our HOPE Advisory Board members in attendance tonight? Rebecca, anything else that we wanted to share that I forgot about? Nope.
Just another expression of gratitude from the members who supported us with the notice of funding opportunity. We're excited to move forward with that, and your very thoughtful approach to it was very, very helpful.
Yeah, Barbara, Ari, and Cade, thank you very much. It was a lot of work over the course of a week. Okay, with no other things, we can end your meeting early tonight. Thanks everybody for being here. We'll go ahead and end the May 2024 HOPE meeting. Take care, everybody, and we'll see you back in August. Have a good night, everyone. Paula, are you good? Do you have everything you need before I end the meeting? Okay, thanks. Have a good night.